The modern world is loud. We are awash in a constant, churning sea of chatter, opinion, and self-promotion. Silence has become a rare commodity. It is often misinterpreted as weakness, as a void waiting to be filled, or a failure to engage. Yet, beneath the clamor, there is a different kind of silence. It is the deliberate, potent quiet of the mentally tough. This is not the silence of fear, but the silence of strength. It is the space where genuine power is forged, far from the hurried pronouncements and reactive noise that dominates our digital age. This quietude is a hallmark, a defining trait of those who possess true resilience. We are trained to believe that success demands a constant, visible output. We must tweet our thoughts, broadcast our achievements, and fill every available moment with speech. The mentally tough, however, operate on a different frequency. They conserve their energy. They choose their words with precision. They understand that every word spoken is a commitment, a piece of energy spent, and a potential distraction from the deeper work. Their silence is a filter, sifting the essential from the trivial. This is a deep dive into that profound discipline. We will explore the hidden mechanisms behind this powerful reticence. Why do those who can withstand the greatest pressures often choose to speak the least? What is happening in the mind of the silent observer? We will strip away the societal pressure to perform vocally and look at the profound psychological benefits of withholding commentary. This journey will take us through neuroscience, historical examples of Stoicism, and the high-stakes environments of elite performance. We will meet the leaders, the innovators, and the survivors who mastered the art of the intentional pause. Their stories reveal that true authority is not shouted, but demonstrated. It is a quiet certainty, an unshakable core built not on what they say, but on what they refuse to say. The silence of the strong is their greatest strategic advantage. It is the sound of listening. It is the sound of processing. It is the sound of imminent, deliberate action. This is the story of how speaking less became the ultimate expression of mental fortitude. We begin by challenging the fundamental assumption that verbal fluency equates to competence. It is a pervasive, yet often misleading, cultural bias. The silence is a shield, deflecting the minor skirmishes that consume others. It is also a sophisticated tool for observation and learning. They do not need to prove their worth in every conversation. Their confidence is an internal compass, not an external display. This internal focus allows for superior decision-making. The lack of constant external validation frees the mind to concentrate on the task at hand. The strong understand that in a world designed for noise, silence is the ultimate act of rebellion and control. The concept of reserved speech as a sign of wisdom is not a modern invention, it is a thread woven throughout human history and philosophy. To understand the strong silence, we must first look backward. Ancient Greek philosophy, particularly Stoicism, placed immense value on aphasia, the ability to remain silent or speak only when necessary. Zeno, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus all championed the idea that words should be scarce and weighted. They viewed excessive speech as a leakage of vital energy, a surrender to fleeting emotion, or a distraction from virtue. The wise person was not the most verbose, but the most measured. In Eastern traditions, the discipline of silence is even more pronounced, serving as a direct path to enlightenment and self-mastery. Think of the contemplative quiet sought in Buddhist and Taoist practice. Silence is a tool for emptying the mind of transient thoughts. It allows the practitioner to connect with a deeper, more enduring reality. The martial arts, too, embody this philosophy. A master fighter is rarely the one boasting or initiating unnecessary verbal exchanges. Their power lies in their stillness. This quiet exterior signals preparedness and an economy of motion, both physical and mental. The silence preceding a movement is as important as the movement itself. Historically, in positions of command, silence has been synonymous with gravitas and authority. Kings, generals, and elder statesmen were often characterized by their reserved nature. Their pronouncements, when finally delivered, carried the full weight of their deliberation, not the haste of a quick retort. The space before their speech created anticipation and amplified their message. Contrast this with the modern political and media landscape, where constant communication is demanded, leading to frequent gaffes and a general dilution of authority. The more a figure speaks, the less impactful their words often become. This historical context establishes a foundational truth: the correlation between self-control, intellectual depth, and verbal restraint is ancient and profound. It is a survival mechanism honed over millennia. The silent strength is a recognition that the inner world is the only one that truly matters. External noise is a distraction from internal clarity. Even in literature, the quiet hero is a recurring archetype, the strong, reserved figure who acts decisively rather than speaks endlessly. This character resonates because it taps into a deep, cultural memory of effective, efficient power. The modern mentally tough individual is merely an inheritor of this tradition. They instinctively recognize that in an attention-starved world, silence commands the greatest attention of all. They have found that the volume of one's voice is inversely proportional to the volume of one's influence. Our exploration of silent strength centers around three distinct, yet interconnected, subjects. Each embodies a different facet of this mental toughness, offering a composite portrait of reserved power. First, we meet Dr. Ilara Vance, a cognitive neuroscientist and chief researcher at the Vanguard Institute for Behavioral Dynamics. Her work focuses on the prefrontal cortex's role in verbal inhibition and emotional regulation. Dr. Vance is the intellectual anchor of our investigation. She is quiet, measured, and famous within her field for letting her data speak, rather than her personality. Her personal silence is a professional method. She argues that the ability to pause and inhibit a verbal response is a key neurological marker of high-functioning mental toughness. Her case studies involve high-stakes professionals, from surgeons to special forces operators, all of whom exhibit a pattern of low-verbal, high-impact behavior. She is mapping the silence in the brain. Second, we profile Marcus, the Walled Chen, a retired, legendary CEO known for navigating his global tech company through three major economic collapses without a single public panic. He was famously inaccessible to the press. Chen's philosophy was simple: when you're talking, you're not building. He created a culture of deep, focused work, insulating his teams from the industry's perpetual buzz. His power lay not in rallying speeches, but in single, decisive, written memos. His few words were like stones dropped in a calm pond; they created massive, lasting ripples. His silence was a tactical choice. It forced his subordinates to step up, articulate their own solutions, and take complete ownership of their domains. He was a silent conductor, demanding perfect pitch from his orchestra. Third is Sasha Petrov, an endurance athlete who specialized in solo, unsupported polar expeditions. Her success in extreme, life-threatening conditions hinged entirely on her internal dialogue and external quiet. In the vast, overwhelming silence of the Arctic, unnecessary chatter is a critical energy drain, a source of psychological weakness. Petrov learned to silence her doubts and the mental temptation to seek external comfort. Her survival was an exercise in pure mental economy. She moved, she breathed, she focused, all in a profound state of external quiet. Her story grounds our theory in pure, raw human experience. It proves that in the most severe tests, the capacity for intentional silence is a life-saving tool of mental resilience. These three subjects, the scientist, the executive, and the explorer, provide the empirical, strategic, and existential pillars for our argument. Their lives demonstrate that the greatest strength is often expressed in the deepest quiet. Their combined narratives form the core evidence that speaking less is not merely an absence of noise, but the active presence of true mental fortitude. They are the practitioners of purposeful restraint. The central mystery we face is the statistical paradox of communication in leadership and high-performance fields. Why, in fields that demand high levels of collaboration and decisive communication, are the most consistently successful individuals often the most verbally reserved? Common wisdom dictates that effective leaders must be charismatic communicators, the ones who command a room with their voice. Yet, when we isolate the true titans, those who sustained excellence over decades, not just moments, a pattern of verbal restraint emerges. The problem lies in the disconnect between perception and reality. The public often perceives the loud, the quick-witted, and the aggressive speaker as the most competent. The true strength, however, operates below this surface level of performance. It is a slow, steady burn, not a sudden flash of heat. The mystery is why the chatterbox effect persists. Why do people default to over-communicating even when it demonstrably leads to poor decision-making and heightened emotional reactivity? Dr. Vance's initial research highlighted this anomaly in control groups. Individuals who were instructed to maintain a slight, deliberate verbal delay performed significantly better in complex cognitive tasks than those encouraged to think out loud or respond instantly. This led to the hypothesis that excessive speech is a cognitive drain. It diverts processing power away from critical analytical functions and towards the superficial task of articulation. The mentally tough, therefore, are not simply quiet, they are engaging in a highly efficient form of cognitive load management. Their silence is a resource allocation strategy. The initial mystery deepens when we examine high-pressure negotiations. The silent negotiator, the one who lets the other side fill the void, consistently achieves superior outcomes. The mental pressure to break the silence leads the less disciplined party to reveal critical information, a fundamental blunder of verbal incontinence. The strong resist this pressure. They understand that silence is a form of passive leverage. It transfers the psychological burden of the conversation onto their opponent. The problem is compounded by social anxiety, where silence is perceived as awkwardness, leading many to overcompensate with unnecessary speech. The mentally tough have overcome this need for external validation. They are comfortable in the void. They know that the most important information is often revealed in the moments between words, in the desperation of others to make noise. We are left to unravel this fundamental enigma. In a world that rewards talk, why is silence the ultimate competitive advantage for the strong? This is the core behavioral mystery we must solve through a deeper look at the mechanisms of self-control and verbal inhibition. The first definitive clue in understanding the strong's silence came from a critical event involving Marcus Chen, the Wall, during the 2008 financial crisis. This single action fundamentally shifted the narrative around his leadership style. As markets crashed, panic spread through the global business community. Every CEO was on television, issuing statements, announcing emergency measures, and attempting to reassure investors. The noise was deafening, a collective scream of fear and reaction. Yet, Chen remained silent. For 3 critical weeks, while his competitors were losing billions, Chen did not give an interview, release a press statement, or send a mass email. His silence was deafening, attracting immense criticism. Journalists called it an act of corporate dereliction. Competitors suggested he was frozen with fear, paralyzed by the scale of the crisis. Then, on the 22nd day, a single, concise memo was released to the press, spanning less than 100 words. It outlined 3 surgical, highly strategic acquisitions of distressed competitor assets. The acquisitions were bold, counterintuitive, and perfectly timed, exploiting the very panic his silence had allowed him to observe dispassionately. The company's stock soared, while others continued to fall. This event was the revelation. Chen's silence was not an absence of activity, it was the intense, focused execution of a plan that required zero external distraction. He later explained that during those 3 weeks, he had instructed his entire executive team to avoid all media and focus solely on modeling the most extreme case scenarios. Their internal quiet mirrored his own. The noise of the outside world, he reasoned, was contaminated information. It was pure emotion disguised as analysis. His verbal restraint had a dual function: it protected his company from the collective hysteria, and it preserved his own cognitive resources for the complex calculation required. The external world saw paralysis, but internally, the engine was running at maximum efficiency. This event provided the core clue for Dr. Vance's research: silence is the necessary precondition for complex, non-reactive decision-making under duress. The mentally tough do not respond, they observe, calculate, and then act. The power of the counternarrative was immense. In a crisis, the person who speaks first often speaks least intelligently. Chen waited until his words could not be debated, only acted upon. His was the first clear victory born entirely from the discipline of the purposeful pause. To truly understand the source of silent strength, we must delve into the developmental origins of verbal inhibition and self-control. This isn't just a learned behavior, it is often forged in specific environmental and psychological conditions. Dr. Vance's team mapped the developmental history of highly reserved, mentally tough subjects. A common thread emerged: an early environment that demanded self-sufficiency and high levels of internal processing. This often manifested as a childhood where the subject was an observer, rather than a participant, in high drama or high-stakes family dynamics. They learned early that speaking out was either futile or detrimental. This created a powerful feedback loop. Silence led to safety, which led to superior observation, which led to better prediction of outcomes. The reward system in their brain began to associate successful navigation with verbal restraint. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, is crucial here. The mentally tough have a highly disciplined, efficient pathway for inhibiting impulsive verbal responses. This inhibition is an active process, not a passive one. It requires more energy to not speak than to speak impulsively. Their strength lies in their ability to consistently deploy this inhibitory function. Another critical origin point is the development of a strong locus of control. People who believe their outcomes are the result of their own actions and efforts, internal locus, are far less likely to seek external validation through constant communication than those who feel subject to external forces, external locus. The quiet strong believe their actions, not their words, define them. They are not waiting for the crowd's applause or approval. Sasha Petrov's life is a perfect example of this self-reliance. Her initial training involved sensory deprivation, drills where communication was strictly forbidden for days. This forced her to rely entirely on internal metrics, her body's feedback, her map reading, and her mental fortitude, without the social comfort of conversation. The silence became her guide, not her enemy. The origin of silent strength is therefore a synthesis of developmental conditioning and high-level cognitive training. It's the result of an environment that prioritized independent problem-solving over communal commiseration. They are individuals who have internalized the truth that your most valuable conversation is the one you have with yourself, and that dialogue is easily interrupted by the noise of the outside world. The strength to be silent is the strength to be truly self-governed. This is where the foundation of their mental fortress is laid, brick by silent brick. The prevailing, yet often misguided, theories surrounding the reserved individual must be addressed to truly appreciate the power of silent strength. Misdirection often clouds the true nature of this behavioral pattern. The most common conflicting theory is that the reserved person is simply an introvert, and their silence is a manifestation of social anxiety or low energy. While some may be introverted, their silence is fundamentally different. An introvert conserves energy by avoiding social engagement. The mentally tough person is actively deploying silence as a tool of engagement and influence, even in a high-energy environment. Their silence is not rooted in a desire to retreat, but in a choice to dominate the mental landscape of the interaction. It is a strategic presence, not a passive absence. Another misdirection is the assumption of arrogance or dismissiveness. The quiet person is often labeled aloof, uninterested, or condescending. This perception is a defensive reaction from those uncomfortable with the lack of verbal mirroring. The noisy world mistakes introspection for hostility. The reality is that the mentally tough are often the most attentive people in the room. Their silence is a sign of deep processing, not disregard. A third, equally flawed theory suggests a lack of intellectual fluency. The belief that if one were truly intelligent, one would be able to articulate their thoughts instantly and eloquently. This theory fails to distinguish between fluency and substance. The strong delay speech not because they lack the words, but because they are ensuring their words are the correct ones. They prioritize accuracy and impact over speed. Their silence is the crucible in which a mere thought is refined into a precise, actionable statement. These early misdirections, social anxiety, arrogance, and low intelligence, are psychological defenses the loud world uses to cope with the unnerving presence of stillness. The mentally tough challenge the social contract of mandatory engagement. They refuse to be drawn into a transactional exchange of superficial commentary. Their reserved nature forces others to move beyond surface-level pleasantries and into substantive discussion. The key to overcoming these misdirections is to redefine the word communication. For the strong, communication is not merely speaking, it is the transfer of intent, and often, silence communicates intent, control, confidence, and observation, more effectively than any deluge of words. The investigation takes a crucial turn with the discovery of an internal document from Marcus Chen's tenure at his tech company, a document known only as the Protocol of Intent. This document, unearthed by Dr. Vance's research team, serves as a direct, written testament to the philosophy of silent strength. The Protocol of Intent was not a public-facing manual, it was a small, 3-page pamphlet issued only to the top 100 executives at the company. It contained a set of rules for communication, which were revolutionary in their restraint. Rule 1: the 72-hour response. No major decision or external communication could be finalized within 72 hours of a crisis event. This enforced delay was explicitly designed to filter out emotional reaction. Rule 2: word count budget. Every executive was given a metaphorical, word count budget for press, internal town halls, and even key meetings. The message was clear: conserve your words. Rule 3: the silence penalty. Any executive who publicly contradicted the company line, or offered an opinion not fully vetted by data, would be subject to immediate disciplinary action. This institutionalized verbal discipline. The most revealing section was the justification, which stated, "The cost of a mistake is a quantifiable figure. The cost of a hasty word is incalculable, for it undermines the trust and deliberation upon which all success is built." This document was not about secrecy, it was about the institutionalization of self-control. It proved that Chen's personal silence was not an eccentric habit, but a formalized, strategic system for corporate mental toughness. It acted as a blueprint, showing how an individual's personal discipline, the capacity to remain quiet, could be scaled and enforced across a global organization, transforming it into a cohesive unit of non-reactive decision-makers. The protocol became the crucial witness that testified to the active, intentional nature of the strong silence. It demonstrated that this was a deliberate strategy, not a temperamental trait. This formalized structure counter-argued every misdirection. It proved the silence was not due to social anxiety or low intelligence, but was a function of high-level strategic planning and immense self-discipline. The very existence of such a document in a high-speed industry was an anomaly. It was a manifesto for slowing down, for stepping off the information treadmill, and for letting the noise of the competition consume itself. The Protocol of Intent was the ultimate proof of silence as corporate strength. The deeper we delve, the more the stakes for maintaining this silent strength escalate, particularly in the face of modern, weaponized noise. The challenge for the mentally tough is no longer just internal regulation, but external defense against an environment designed to force them to speak. The primary complication is the rise of the instantaneous feedback loop, fueled by social media and 24-hour news cycles. This environment actively punishes the pause. In a crisis, a silent figure is often interpreted as guilty or uncaring. The pressure to issue a statement, any statement, is immense. This is where the mental fortress of the strong is truly tested. We examine the case of a political leader, a subject of Dr. Vance's study, who was intentionally targeted by a media frenzy based on a minor, fabricated error. The public outcry demanded an immediate, emotional apology. The leader's team was in a panic, urging a rapid response. The leader, adhering to the principles of silent strength, refused, instead choosing a 3-day period of total media blackout. This intentional vacuum allowed the fabricated story to peak and then, crucially, burn itself out. The lack of oxygen, the lack of an official response to feed the frenzy, caused the noise to become disproportionate to the actual event. When the leader finally spoke, their measured, 60-second statement was delivered after the emotional storm had passed, and it instantly regained control of the narrative. The silence had acted as an emotional shock absorber. The complication, however, is the toll this silent discipline takes. The pressure to not speak, to withstand the constant demands for a reaction, requires an enormous expenditure of mental energy. It is a form of active resistance. The strong must resist the biological urge to defend, justify, or retaliate, an urge that is powerfully amplified by the surrounding noise. The risk of misinterpretation is also a major complication. Marcus Chen's 3-week silence nearly resulted in a shareholder revolt, fueled by the speculation of his lack of control. His mental toughness was the only thing standing against the tide of institutional panic. The greater the stakes, the more uncomfortable, and therefore, the more powerful, the silence becomes. This escalation reveals the true nature of the battle. The strong are not fighting their circumstances, they are fighting the human instinct to react, a fight that becomes exponentially harder the louder the world gets. The silence is the battlefield of their ultimate self-control. The initial analysis of core evidence focuses on the neurological and psychological benefits derived from the act of verbal inhibition. Dr. Vance's work provides quantifiable data to support the behavioral pattern we've observed. The core evidence centers on functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, studies conducted on subjects exhibiting high mental toughness during high-stakes simulations. The key finding is the robust activation of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC. The DLPFC is the brain's chief executive officer, responsible for working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control. In the mentally tough subjects, the DLPFC showed significantly higher and more sustained activation before a verbal response was generated. This confirms that their silence is not passive, it is a period of intense cognitive calibration. They are actively using their DLPFC to pause, model consequences, and override the impulsive response dictated by the amygdala, the brain's fear center. The psychological evidence points to a phenomenon we term response lag advantage, RLA. By introducing a deliberate, 3 to 5 second delay before speaking, the mentally tough achieve a clear advantage. During this brief lag, they engage in 2 critical functions, self-correction and information synthesis. The lag allows the mind to run a quick, internal check for potential errors, overstatements, or emotional biases in the planned response. This self-correction mechanism dramatically reduces the frequency of regrettable communication. It makes their eventual statement nearly impervious to immediate attack or misinterpretation. Furthermore, the silence itself serves as a data-gathering tool. While others are speaking, the mentally tough are performing a rapid, nonverbal audit of the environment, reading body language, assessing reactions, and identifying unspoken concerns. This auditory and visual data is fed directly into the DLPFC, which uses the moment of silence to integrate it, thus making the eventual verbal response more context-aware and strategically precise. The evidence is clear: the strong speak less not because they have less to say, but because they are leveraging a superior, neurologically supported strategy for communication. They are maximizing the cognitive return on every single word spoken. Their reserved nature is a testament to their self-awareness. They understand that the moment they open their mouth, their ability to gather new, unfiltered information drastically diminishes. Therefore, they only speak once they have exhausted the utility of listening. The environment plays a critical, shaping role in the development and necessity of silent strength. Our deep dive into the environments where silence is paramount reveals a direct correlation between external adversity and internal verbal restraint. Sasha Petrov's solitary polar expeditions provide the purest example. In the vast, unforgiving silence of the Arctic or Antarctic, noise is not just a distraction, it can be a harbinger of disaster. Excessive talking in such environments is a colossal waste of calories and an invitation to lose focus on the immediate, life-sustaining task. The environment itself demands a ruthless economy of effort. Petrov developed a mental minimization technique. Every word, internal or external, had to pass a strict filter. Is this word necessary for survival, progress, or course correction? If not, it was discarded. The geographical extreme forces a clarity that is often lost in comfortable, temperate zones. There is no room for small talk, self-doubt, or verbose complaint. The lesson from this environment is universal: the greater the consequence of error, the higher the premium on silence. We can apply this to the metaphorical jungles of high finance or the front lines of high-stakes negotiations. Marcus Chen enforced a form of metaphorical scarcity. He made words expensive within his organization. By doing so, he replicated the high-pressure environment of the explorer. His executives were forced to treat every statement as if their survival depended on its precision. The opposite environment is also revealing: the perpetually noisy, hyper-socialized urban or digital space. This environment rewards immediate, low-effort verbal output and fosters mental fragility. In these soft environments, people use speech to regulate anxiety and seek affirmation. This creates a reliance on external validation that the mentally tough have entirely rejected. The geographical deep dive confirms that silent strength is an adaptive trait. It is a necessary response to environments that demand self-reliance and unforgiving accuracy. The strong person carries their polar environment within them, treating every situation as one where energy must be conserved and every decision must be perfect. They choose to live in a self-imposed, internal stillness, regardless of the external noise, because they recognize that true high performance is silent performance. The environment may change, but the protocol of quiet discipline remains constant. To fully appreciate the strength of silence, we must examine its primary antagonists. These are the forces, both human and systemic, that actively undermine verbal restraint and champion the noise. The primary human antagonist is the verbal dominator, the individual who uses constant speech to control the conversation, mask insecurity, and project a false sense of competence. Their noise is a distraction technique. They fear silence because it exposes the shallowness of their own thought process. They must constantly talk to reassure themselves and others of their relevance. The verbal dominator operates on the principle that the loudest voice wins, an assumption the mentally tough quietly shatter through their decisive actions. Their opposition is a key pressure point. The second, systemic antagonist is the culture of reaction. This is the pervasive societal and media structure that demands instantaneous response and apology for every perceived slight or event. This culture weaponizes the pause, turning a brief moment of silence into a public trial by speculation. It is designed to reward emotion over reason, and speed over accuracy. It actively preys on the psychological need for belonging, making people feel obligated to chime in, to offer their take, to prove they are with it. The strong resist this conformity. A third antagonist is insecurity-driven gossip. This is the lower stakes, everyday noise fueled by people who communicate minor details and personal judgments to feel important or connected. This noise is a massive consumer of cognitive resources. It diverts the brain's focus from productive work to meaningless social maintenance. The strong, through their silence, refuse to participate in this economy of mental distraction. Their reserved nature acts as an immune system against the contagion of gossip. These antagonists provide the contrast. The verbal dominator shows us the weakness inherent in uncontrolled speech. The culture of reaction highlights the courage required for a strategic pause. Gossip reveals the mental poverty of verbal excess. The mentally tough are in a constant, low-grade conflict with these forces. Their victory is not won by arguing, but by simply refusing to engage on the enemy's terms. By remaining quiet, they force the dominator to exhaust themselves, they allow the culture of reaction to overreach and implode, and they starve the gossip of the attention it craves. Their silence is an active, formidable form of counterintelligence. The narrative of silent strength is complicated by an unforeseen alliance that initially appears to be a betrayal of the principle, the strategic use of surrogate speech. The strong, by definition, speak rarely. But their influence requires that their message, when ready, is delivered effectively. This necessitates an alliance with a trusted, highly verbal proxy, a betrayal of the do-it-yourself communication model. Marcus Chen, for instance, had a longtime chief communications officer, a woman named Anya Sharma. Sharma was everything Chen was not, media-savvy, highly articulate, and a master of public messaging. In the eyes of the public, Sharma was the voice of the company, and Chen was the quiet, perhaps even eccentric, founder. But this relationship was a sophisticated, deliberate partnership. Sharma was Chen's verbal assassin. Her job was not to interpret his thoughts, but to articulate his meticulously crafted, pre-vetted strategy at the precise moment he chose. She was the controlled release valve for his massive, internal pressure. Her words were Chen's words, but filtered and amplified to hit the maximum target with minimal noise. The apparent betrayal is this: if silence is strength, why outsource the speaking? The alliance is not a betrayal, it is an evolution of strength. The mentally tough recognize their own strategic weaknesses. They know that to maximize the impact of their own silence, they need an agent to manage the noise that must still be handled. This allows the strong to remain in the essential state of observation and calculation, while the proxy engages in the necessary, but distracting, work of external communication. The strong person is never truly silent, they have simply delegated the act of speaking. This alliance works because of absolute trust. The proxy must be as disciplined as the principal, only speaking when and how instructed. The moment the proxy starts speaking on their own initiative, or improvises the core message, the alliance becomes a true betrayal. The strong person's power is diluted when their silence is broken by an undisciplined surrogate. This discovery reveals a sophisticated truth: silent strength is not isolation. It is the ability to manage the communication process, both personal and delegated, with such ruthless efficiency that only the essential message is ever transmitted, and the source of the true power remains shielded by the quiet. For the mentally tough, the point of no return is the moment they internalize the permanent shift from a reactive to a deliberate verbal posture. It is the conscious, irreversible commitment to silence as a core operating principle. For Dr. Alara Vance, this moment occurred early in her career during a critical surgery observation. She was tasked with relaying data to a surgeon during a complex, life-or-death procedure. During a moment of high tension, another observer panicked and spoke a non-critical question. The surgeon, distracted for a fraction of a second, almost made a critical error. Vance realized that her role was not to communicate all information, but only the essential, actionable information. The other person's unnecessary word was a form of violence against the process. From that day forward, Vance treated every communication as a potential interference. She committed to a verbal minimalism that prioritized impact over mere transmission. For Marcus Chen, the point of no return was the near-catastrophic collapse of a smaller company he advised, which he realized was entirely due to the CEO's inability to stop making reassuring, yet ultimately false, public statements. He saw that the CEO's talkativeness was a form of psychological self-soothing, a self-betrayal that ultimately destroyed his credibility. Chen committed then to building a wall of silence around his own executive function. The commitment to silent strength is a difficult, singular choice because it necessitates the strong person to live in a state of permanent nonconformity. They choose clarity over comfort. They cross a psychological line where the social pressure to speak no longer has jurisdiction over their internal decision-making. They choose the integrity of their judgment over the temporary relief of a verbal release. This point of no return is marked by a sudden, profound indifference to how one is perceived by the loud world. Once the strong person stops caring about the perception of awkwardness or arrogance, their commitment is absolute. They understand that the short-term discomfort of silence is a small price to pay for the long-term, compounding advantage of clarity, control, and precision. They have chosen the difficult path of deliberate restraint, making the noisy world the point from which they can never return. The halfway point of our investigation brings a startling, critical twist. The silence of the strong is not a sign of emotional absence, but rather a symptom of emotional supremacy. The common perception is that mentally tough people speak less because they are unemotional, detached, or cold. The revelation is that they speak less because they are more aware of their internal emotional landscape and its volatile nature. Dr. Vance's neurological studies revealed that the moment of silence is a period of intense, rapid emotional coding and categorization. The strong person is not ignoring their feelings, they are classifying them at lightning speed. They realize that every emotion, anger, excitement, fear, or euphoria, carries a high risk of verbal error. They use the pause to allow the immediate, raw emotional charge to dissipate before allowing a single word to pass their lips. The twist, therefore, is that the silence is a highly sophisticated form of emotional intelligence in action. It is the strongest proof of a deep, rather than shallow, emotional life. Consider the example of an elite military negotiator. When faced with an aggressive, hostile counterpart, the novice negotiator will react, mirroring the anger. The mentally tough negotiator will become profoundly quiet. This silence is not defiance. It is the negotiator actively telling their own internal fear and anger to stand down, allowing them to process the threat without contaminating their verbal strategy. The quiet response is often the most emotionally devastating countermove. It forces the antagonist to confront the asymmetry of their own emotional outburst. This twist reframes the entire concept. Silent strength is not merely about preserving cognitive resources, it is about protecting the sanctity of the decision-making process from the pollution of transient feelings. The strong have learned the ultimate lesson: emotion is a powerful source of data, but it is a terrible editor. They use their silence to gather the data, the emotion, without letting it control the narrative. This is the moment we understand that the silence is a deliberate act of mastery over the self. It is a protective sheath around the fragile, yet powerful, core of their emotional being, ensuring that their words are driven by intent, not impulse. Our second set of clues emerges from an unexpected domain: the analysis of team dynamics and collaborative output. This evidence reveals that silent strength is also a multiplier for collective competence. Dr. Vance's team analyzed performance data from high-functioning project teams. The clear correlation was that teams with a silent, reserved leader consistently outperformed teams led by highly verbal, constant contributors. The new evidence is the vacuum of responsibility. When a leader is verbally restrained, they create an intentional vacuum of communication, which paradoxically forces the team to step up and fill the space with intelligent, proactive input. The verbally reserved leader does not solve all the problems or dictate all the answers. Instead, they frame the problem and then wait, their silence becoming an active demand for ownership from their subordinates. This is a powerful clue because it shows the strong person is not just controlling their speech, but actively managing the speech of others. Their quiet is a pedagogical tool. Marcus Chen's internal memos, which often ended with an open-ended question and no immediate follow-up, were a prime example of this. The silence after the question forced executives to deliberate and bring well-formed, complete solutions, not just half-baked ideas. This also relates to the concept of listening leverage. The strong person's silence, coupled with attentive, nonverbal cues, eye contact, a slight nod, radically improves the quality of the information they receive. People instinctively want to impress the quiet listener, leading them to be more precise, more articulate, and more thorough in their presentation. The strong's quiet presence demands excellence in the speaker. The second set of clues thus moves the narrative from individual self-control to systemic influence. It proves that silent strength is not just an internal virtue, but a highly effective strategy for organizational design and leadership. It is evidence that the strongest leaders are not those who talk their teams into submission, but those whose strategic quiet empowers their teams to find their own voices and their own power. The silence of the one creates the competence of the many. The social and psychological impact of silent strength is both profound and disruptive, challenging deeply ingrained human instincts for social mirroring and rapid affiliation. The primary social impact is the creation of a gravitas effect. The reserved person, by speaking less, amplifies the perceived weight of their every utterance. When a usually quiet person finally speaks, everyone listens. The psychological effect is one of increased anticipation, respect, and compliance. The scarcity of their words creates immense value. In contrast, the highly verbose person experiences the dilution effect. Their constant commentary reduces the perceived significance of any single statement, leading to an eventual social deafness. The mentally tough intentionally cultivate this gravitas effect. They understand that influence is a resource to be conserved, not a river to be freely poured out. The psychological impact on the individual is a profound sense of self-reliance and internal calm. By refusing to engage in unnecessary verbal exchanges, they shield their internal world from external emotional turbulence. This leads to a lower baseline stress level and superior mental clarity. They are not constantly in a state of external performance or defense. However, the disruptive social impact is the discomfort they inflict on others. The silence of the strong can be socially awkward, even intimidating, for those who rely on constant verbal feedback. It forces the other party to confront their own need for validation or their own verbal incontinence. This discomfort is often misinterpreted as personal rejection. The mentally tough must learn to navigate this, understanding that their choice to be reserved is an act of self-optimization, not a personal critique of others. They are willing to accept the social friction that comes with their discipline. This psychological dynamic is key. The strong do not need to be liked by everyone, they need to be effective. Their silence is a trade-off. They sacrifice immediate social ease for long-term influence and internal peace. They are comfortable being the single, silent pillar in a room full of swaying, noisy reeds. The second part of the core evidence analysis moves beyond the brain scans and into the quantifiable metrics of outcome. This data proves that silent strength translates directly into superior results in measurable, high-stakes domains. The critical evidence is drawn from the analysis of thousands of negotiation records, a study conducted on behalf of Dr. Vance's institute. The data sets compared the final outcomes of high-verbal negotiators versus low-verbal negotiators. The low-verbal group, characterized by long, deliberate pauses and an overall lower word count, achieved a median outcome 18% superior to the high-verbal group. This is the quantifiable proof of the silence premium. The underlying mechanism is the power of the unbroken pause. The negotiators who could comfortably endure a silent stalemate were able to wear down the opposition's patience and emotional control. The opponent, feeling compelled to fill the void, invariably offered concessions or leaked critical information simply to restart the verbal flow. The silence acted as an invisible bargaining chip. Further evidence comes from the analysis of investment success. A long-term study of venture capitalists showed that the most successful investors were not the ones who asked the most questions in pitches, but the ones who asked the fewest, most incisive questions, interspersed with long periods of silent consideration. Their silence was a filter, allowing the entrepreneurs to inadvertently reveal their pressure points or their true valuation floor, which they might not have done if constantly interrogated. The strong use silence as a form of pressure testing. This second analysis of core evidence confirms that silent strength is not merely a philosophical ideal, it is a highly profitable, strategically superior behavior. The data proves that the mentally tough have perfected the art of the maximal impact minimum word equation. They treat words as bullets, not spray and pray ammunition, ensuring that every shot is targeted, lethal, and impactful. Their results are superior because their approach is built on patience and deep processing, factors directly enabled by the discipline of verbal restraint. The silence is the hidden engine of their success. The truth of silent strength is not easily accepted by the dominant culture of noise, leading to systemic attempts to cover up or suppress the power of verbal restraint. The loud world has a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. The first attempt at suppression comes from the corporate training industry. Business schools, leadership seminars, and communication coaches are predominantly biased toward teaching charismatic, fluent, and responsive speech. They prioritize selling yourself and commanding the room, often mistaking volume for value. They actively suppress the idea that silence can be a superior form of leadership. The fear is that if everyone adopted silent strength, the entire industry dedicated to teaching verbal performance would become obsolete. The truth of the strong is bad for the business of the loud. The second form of suppression is the media narrative. Media outlets are commercially reliant on rapid, emotionally charged content. The measured, delayed, and precise response of the mentally tough is terrible for ratings. The media actively sensationalizes the noise of a situation, elevating the most reactive voices and marginalizing the measured response. They suppress the power of silence by simply ignoring it or framing it as a negative. The result is a constant feedback loop that rewards the quick, shallow verbal response, thereby actively discouraging the deliberate pause. A third, more subtle suppression is the internal justification among the verbally dominant. They create rationalizations for their own talkativeness. I'm a people person, I'm thinking out loud, or I'm just being transparent. These justifications are a psychological cover-up, preventing them from confronting the self-betrayal of their own lack of discipline. They suppress the truth of silence by redefining it as a weakness in others. The strong, therefore, are not just practicing self-control, they are operating against a massive, pervasive cultural infrastructure designed to force them into verbal exhibitionism. Their sustained silence in the face of this systemic pressure is the ultimate testament to their mental fortitude. They are the quiet revolutionaries, whose refusal to speak is the most powerful protest against the tyranny of noise. The quiet truth is suppressed because it threatens the very foundation of the loud world. The investigation now deepens, focusing on the techniques the mentally tough use to maintain their silence in the most demanding circumstances. The pursuit is to find the practical, repeatable mechanism of their verbal control. Our focus turns to Dr. Vance's practical application study, the Silence Immersion Protocol. This protocol forces subjects to engage in high-pressure tasks while strictly limiting their total word count, essentially weaponizing the silence. The first practical mechanism discovered is chunking and pre-vetting. Before a meeting or crucial interaction, the strong mentally chunk their potential verbal contributions into a maximum of 3 core, non-negotiable points. They pre-vet these points for necessity and impact, ensuring that they only speak to deliver one of these pre-approved chunks. This prevents conversational drift and emotional hijacking. The second mechanism is the deliberate use of nonverbal communication as a substitute for unnecessary talk. A confident posture, sustained eye contact, and a subtle nod or shake of the head are used to manage the flow of conversation without expending words. This allows them to participate actively in the social contract without breaking their verbal discipline. Their nonverbal cues communicate, "I am listening and processing," which is often all that is required. The pursuit reveals that the ultimate technique is self-gamification. Sasha Petrov, during her long expeditions, turned her silence into a mental game, where every unnecessary word was a penalty point. She created an internal reward system for successful verbal inhibition, making the discipline of silence an internal source of competitive pride. This reframes the challenge from self-deprivation to self-mastery. The investigation deepens to show that the strong's quietude is a sophisticated, layered skill, not an innate talent. It is a set of learned, repeatable behaviors designed to manage cognitive resources and maximize influence. The pursuit concludes that the mentally tough are not born silent, they train their silence with the same rigor an athlete trains their body. They have turned the act of not speaking into an optimized, high-performance skill. To illustrate the stark contrast between verbal noise and silent strength, we introduce a parallel storyline: the life and eventual failure of Jonathan Rourke, a highly charismatic, verbally fluent executive who rose rapidly at the same time as Marcus Chen. Rourke was the antithesis of Chen. He was a constant presence in the media, a frequent public speaker, and a man who believed his job was to fill every room with his energy and his voice. He was lauded as a communication genius. He had a quote for every situation, an immediate answer for every question, and a natural, aggressive verbal dominance that seemed to sweep away all opposition. His flaw, however, was exposed during a major product recall. Rourke, seeking to reassure the public instantly, issued 5 different, slightly contradictory statements over a 48-hour period. His verbal incontinence created confusion, undermined the technical teams, and eroded public trust at a compounding rate. He was trying to manage the crisis with talk, not action. The flashback reveals that Rourke's rapid-fire talk was a continuous mask for his lack of strategic depth. He was too busy speaking to listen, and too focused on performance to engage in deep analysis. His verbal fluidity was mistaken for mental flexibility. In reality, his inability to pause meant he never truly processed the full implications of the crisis. He was a victim of his own unchecked talent for rhetoric. Contrast this with Chen's single, 100-word memo during his crisis. Rourke's downfall came from 1,000 unnecessary words. Chen's success came from the discipline to say almost none. Rourke's eventual professional failure was a classic case of verbal burnout. He exhausted his credibility and his own psychological resources by constantly performing for the external audience. The parallel storyline serves as a cautionary tale: verbal fluency, if untethered from a ruthless discipline for restraint, becomes a liability. It is a psychological mirror reflecting the power of Chen's quiet fortitude. The strong person looks at Rourke's path and sees the true cost of prioritizing being heard over being right. The most compelling confrontation in the narrative of silent strength is the intellectual and psychological clash that occurs when the strong and the loud are forced into direct conflict. We observe a high-stakes intellectual confrontation between Dr. Vance and a prominent rival, Dr. Leon Strauss, a vocal proponent of explanatory speech theory, which argues that transparency and constant verbal feedback are essential for modern leadership. The confrontation takes place during a live, unscripted academic debate. Strauss begins by aggressively challenging Vance's data, arguing that her silent leaders are merely exhibiting anachronistic, dictatorial behavior. He uses his verbal fluency to dominate the first half, filling the air with rhetorical flourish, high-speed argumentation, and emotional appeals to openness. Vance's response is the essence of silent strength in action. She does not interrupt, argue, or mirror his aggression. She remains completely still, allowing Strauss to spend his energy and inadvertently reveal the logical flaws in his own argument. When it is finally her turn, she pauses. The silence hangs in the air, a long, uncomfortable, deliberate 8 seconds. When she finally speaks, her voice is calm, low, and perfectly modulated. She doesn't address his rhetoric, she surgically dissects one single, weak premise in his multi-point argument, using her data to turn the one flaw into a catastrophic failure. She says, "Dr. Strauss, your theory requires that the human mind can both talk and process complex data optimally at the same time. Our fMRI data proves this to be a neurological impossibility. You are mistaking speed for depth." The confrontation is won not by the volume of words, but by the intellectual precision of a few. Strauss, having exhausted his verbal arsenal, is left with no immediate, measured counterresponse, falling into the trap of a hasty, emotional retort. This moment proves that the silence of the strong is an act of intellectual judo. They let the opponent use their own force, their words, against them. By refusing to speak, they refuse to provide a target, and when they finally move, their strike is devastatingly accurate and final. The commitment to silent strength, while resulting in immense success, is not without significant sacrifice and moments of major loss, often the loss of immediate human connection and social warmth. The primary sacrifice is the loss of immediate empathy. The strong person's reserved nature, their refusal to share every feeling or participate in emotional commiseration, can create a barrier with those around them. In moments of shared personal stress, the person who speaks less is often perceived as uncaring or emotionally distant. They sacrifice the comfort of being understood instantly for the clarity of self-control. Marcus Chen, despite his success, faced immense loss in his personal life. His first marriage failed, his former spouse citing his emotional withholding and unbreakable wall as the primary cause. He had extended his professional protocol of silence into his personal life, believing that emotional expression was a liability. This was a critical misapplication of his strength. The discipline that made him a world-class CEO made him an emotionally unavailable partner. He had achieved mastery over his external world but failed to adapt his control to the internal, relational one. This is the major loss, the occasional failure of the strong to discern between necessary self-control and destructive emotional inhibition. Not all silence is golden. Sometimes, words are required for the maintenance of the human bond. Sasha Petrov also speaks of the profound loneliness of her silent expeditions. The sacrifice was not just physical, but the complete, prolonged absence of the human voice as a source of comfort and sanity. This reveals a crucial nuance: silent strength is a powerful tool, but it is not a complete philosophy for life. It is a strategic advantage that must be deployed judiciously, not a blanket behavior applied to every domain. The ultimate sacrifice is the denial of the easy path. The strong person sacrifices the ease of being liked for the difficulty of being respected, and they must constantly fight the urge to break their discipline for the sake of temporary comfort or validation. As the investigation draws to a close, the final pieces of the puzzle concerning the strong silence converge, forming a cohesive, three-part model of mental toughness. The first piece is cognitive economy. The strong person understands that the mind is a finite resource. Their silence is the most efficient way to reduce mental clutter and cognitive load, reserving all available processing power for high-value tasks. They treat their words like valuable currency. They do not spend them frivolously, ensuring that their mental bank account is always full for the next critical decision. The second piece is psychological endurance. The prolonged silence is a continuous act of resistance against external pressure and internal impulse. This resistance is a form of mental training that builds psychological muscle. Each successful moment of non-reaction strengthens the inhibitory circuits in the prefrontal cortex, making the next moment of silence easier. Their quiet is a habit that compounds over time, leading to exponential increases in mental fortitude. The final piece, and the most transformative, is informational superiority. The strong person's quietude is an active form of intelligence gathering. They are always listening, always observing, while the loud are busy broadcasting. They allow others to reveal their strategies, weaknesses, and emotional states without offering any counterdata. They are the fixed-point listener in a noisy system, gathering all the data required for a perfect strike. When these three pieces, cognitive economy, psychological endurance, and informational superiority, fall into place, the reason for the strong silence becomes perfectly clear. It is the most rational, efficient, and advantageous behavior for long-term success. Their silence is the operational center of a highly optimized human system. It is the necessary condition that allows for their superior thinking, their unwavering composure, and their ultimate, inevitable success. The mystery is solved. The strong speak less because it is the most powerful thing they can possibly do. The primary conclusion is that the silence of the strong is a mastery of time, not a lack of subject. The mentally tough have achieved a level of self-control that allows them to live and operate outside of the immediate moment, making their actions unassailable. They understand that every word is tethered to the moment it is spoken, and that a verbal reaction is inherently a slave to present circumstance and immediate emotion. They refuse this servitude. Their silence is a purposeful delay that allows them to move their decision-making process into a superior timeline. They are acting on tomorrow's analysis, while everyone else is trapped in today's reaction. The truth is that the strong person's quiet is a measure of their deep cognitive patience. They are waiting for the noise to subside, for the emotional dust to settle, and for the full, complete data set to arrive before they commit. This mastery of time is the core truth of their mental toughness. It separates them from the reactive majority. They have learned to trust the pause, to tolerate the social discomfort it creates, and to recognize the exponential power it delivers. The silence is a buffer zone between impulse and action, and it is in this buffer zone that true strategic advantage is forged. Furthermore, the truth reveals that this behavior is contagious. Marcus Chen's protocol, Sasha Petrov's endurance, and Dr. Vance's data all point to the same conclusion: silent strength is an environmental modifier. The reserved person, by their very quiet presence, lowers the emotional temperature and increases the intellectual rigor of any environment they inhabit. They force others to slow down and think. The final, primary conclusion is that the mentally tough are the quiet guardians of rationality. Their silence is the only sustained defense against the overwhelming, destructive tendency of the human race to mistake motion and noise for progress. They are the anchors in the storm of communication. The immediate consequences of adopting silent strength are profound, affecting both the individual's psychological landscape and their social positioning, often leading to a period of initial friction. For the individual, the immediate consequence is a sudden, stark realization of how much unnecessary internal and external noise they were previously tolerating. The world feels slower, and thoughts become clearer, but also more exposed. There is an initial sense of psychological isolation. By refusing to participate in the easy, casual exchanges, the strong person may feel momentarily disconnected from the social flow. This must be overcome by embracing the trade-off. In the professional sphere, the immediate consequence is often a re-rating of their influence. People stop treating them as a casual source of conversation and start treating their utterances as rare, valuable communiques. The strong person immediately commands a new level of respect and attention. Their words are now highly weighted, carrying a gravity they did not possess before the commitment to silence. However, a negative immediate consequence is the potential for early misinterpretation. Colleagues may initially assume disinterest, withdrawal, or arrogance. This is the temporary cost of breaking the social contract of mandatory engagement. The mentally tough must accept that their initial quiet will make others uncomfortable. They must stand firm against the early social pressure to lighten up or say something. The most powerful immediate consequence is the psychological leverage gained in conflicts. Once an opponent realizes the strong person is not going to react or be drawn into a verbal skirmish, their entire strategy of provocation collapses. The strong person immediately short-circuits the drama. Their opponent is forced to either escalate their own irrationality, thereby destroying their own credibility, or to meet the strong person on the field of quiet, deliberate action. The aftermath of embracing silence is a period of transformation, where the old, noisy self is shed for the new, focused one. The person becomes an island of calm, and the immediate consequence is that the tide of noise begins to break against their shore. The long-term legacy of the mentally tough is a quiet, enduring impact, often felt most powerfully after they have left a system or organization. Their influence is characterized by lasting structural change, not transient verbal excitement. The long-term impact is the institutionalization of the pause. Individuals like Marcus Chen leave behind a culture where deep work, measured response, and intentional silence are seen as the default settings for high performance. Their legacy is not in the speeches they gave, but in the systems of verbal discipline they imposed. The culture they foster values quality of thought over quantity of talk. This legacy often outlives the figure itself. An organization that has internalized silent strength will continue to operate with clarity and non-reactivity long after the founder is gone, having built structural resilience. The long-term impact on the individual is a profound and lasting peace. By having successfully fought and won the battle against their own impulse, they achieve an internal quietude that is unshakable. This inner calm allows them to engage with the world from a position of detached observation, leading to superior health outcomes, better decision-making, and a sense of having lived a life of deliberate intent. Their personal legacy is one of unwavering credibility. Because they have established a reputation for only speaking when necessary, their rare words are trusted implicitly. This creates a powerful, compounding effect of influence over time. In the public sphere, their long-term impact is a counternarrative to the celebrity of noise. They serve as a quiet, powerful proof that the greatest achievements are often built in the silence, away from the spotlight and the constant demand for validation. The legacy of the strong is the creation of enduring value. The loud may win the day's headline, but the quiet win the decade's legacy. They teach us that the most powerful form of communication is the one that lasts, the communication of unassailable action. The concept of silent strength is not an antiquated philosophical ideal, it possesses acute and pressing modern relevance, serving as a necessary antidote to the pervasive, toxic noise of the digital age. The digital environment is the ultimate antagonist. It is a system built on, and monetized by, immediate, low-effort verbal response. It actively rewards reaction, outrage, and constant commentary. Silent strength is the essential 21st century survival skill. It is the mental firewall that protects the individual from the cognitive fragmentation caused by the constant deluge of information and the psychological demand for immediate engagement. Its relevance is tied to the rise of attention scarcity. In a world where attention is the most valuable commodity, the person who conserves their own attention through silence is the most empowered. They are the ones who refuse to donate their focus to the trivial and the fleeting, thereby preserving it for the truly essential. In modern leadership, the relevance is paramount. The speed of information means that emotional, reactive decisions can have global, instantaneous consequences. The ability of a leader to enforce a 3-hour silence protocol in a crisis can be the difference between market stability and collapse. The mentally tough are the models for navigating the information war. They show that the best defense is not more data, but a ruthless control over the internal urge to respond to it. Furthermore, silent strength is the key to combating the modern epidemic of imposter syndrome. The strong person's confidence is built on the quiet, internal certainty of their competence, which does not require external, verbal reinforcement. They have untethered their self-worth from the social media feedback loop. Their self-validation is a silent, internal process, making them immune to the anxieties of performance that plague the verbally extroverted. The silence of the strong is the rebellion of the focused. It is the modern declaration of independence from the tyranny of the screen and the clickbait headline. Its relevance lies in its ability to restore sovereignty over one's own mind in an age when every force seeks to usurp it. Despite the wealth of data and the clarity of the conclusion, a few critical questions linger, forming the perpetual mystery that circles the philosophy of silent strength. The most persistent question is, where is the line between strategic silence and destructive withholding? As seen in Marcus Chen's personal life, the discipline that serves one domain can cripple another. Is there a quantifiable metric, a verbal emotional threshold, that the mentally tough can use to discern when silence becomes a liability in their relational world? This remains an ethical and psychological riddle. A second mystery revolves around the successor problem. Can silent strength be successfully taught, or is it a trait that must be forged through severe, personal experience? While protocols can enforce behavioral compliance, e.g., the 72-hour rule, can they truly instill the internal comfort with silence that is the true hallmark of the strong? The question of nature versus nurture in verbal restraint is still not fully resolved. A third lingering question is the paradox of perceived power versus actual power. The strong person's silence creates a perception of immense power, leading others to project their own desires and fears onto the quiet figure. Does this enhanced perception sometimes mask a failure to communicate an essential, simple truth? Is the silent person sometimes given too much credit, and does their quiet occasionally prevent a necessary, verbal intervention? These unanswered questions ensure that the story of silent strength remains a living, evolving narrative. The mentally tough are not perfect automatons, they are high-performing humans grappling with the trade-offs of their immense discipline. The lingering mystery is a necessary reminder that strength is a continuous calibration, not a fixed state. The strong must always be listening, even in their quiet, for the subtle signal that their silence is no longer serving its purpose. The search for the optimal balance between the power of the pause and the necessity of the word will continue indefinitely. We conclude our journey into the silence of the strong, why mentally tough people speak less. The investigation has fundamentally reframed silence, not as an absence, but as a deliberate and profound presence. The silence of the strong is a strategic, operational choice. It is the result of a highly disciplined mind that prioritizes cognitive economy, psychological endurance, and informational superiority. It is a neurological reality, rooted in the superior inhibitory control of the prefrontal cortex, which actively overrides the impulsive, emotional urge to react. The pause is the mechanism of their self-mastery. Historically and contemporaneously, the silent figure is the anchor in the storm of communication. They are the ones who refuse to donate their mental focus to the noise, conserving their energy for the moments that truly matter. The strong have learned the ultimate lesson of influence: the value of a word is directly proportional to its scarcity. By speaking less, they have made their every utterance weighty, precise, and unassailable. They have accepted the inevitable sacrifice, the loss of immediate social warmth and the temporary friction of being misunderstood, in exchange for the unshakable clarity of a life lived with intent. The modern world, with its weaponized noise, makes this discipline more crucial than ever. Silent strength is the ultimate defense against the tyranny of the instantaneous. The final thought is this: do not listen for the strong person's voice, watch for their action. The true power of the mentally tough is not what they say, but the immense, deliberate space they create between what happens and how they choose to respond. That space, that purposeful, commanding quiet, is where all true strength resides. It is the sound of the mind working at its highest, most efficient level. It is the silence that precedes the final, decisive blow. It is the sound of victory.